So how do ported choke tubes compare against ported barrels? Well, today we're gonna find out. George here with the New Hunter's Guide, and today I want to talk about the performance benefits of ported choke tubes and ported barrels. I've talked a lot in the past about ported choke tubes, but I've done very little about ported barrels, so today we're going to put them together and see what we can find out. I have here now, for demonstration purposes, a ported choke tube on a ported barrel. This is just a barrel. There's no gun, okay? This is not a gun. It's just a metal pipe. I can point it anywhere I want to point it. It's completely safe, all right? But for demonstration purposes, I've got them both combined here. We've got the choke tube, and then we've got the porting right here on the barrel. Now, first we're going to talk about ported choke tubes and what the deal is with ported choke tubes. The number one reason people use a ported choke tube is because they're trying to reduce recoil or felt recoil for whatever loads that they're planning to shoot. Now, the big question is, you guys have asked it before, and I've answered it many, many times. Do ported choke tubes, like this one right here, reduce felt recoil on a gun? And the answer is simply, plainly, clearly, no. 0%. Not one thing do ported choke tubes do to reduce recoil or muzzle rise whatsoever. It's a complete fallacy. I've done 3 test videos on the subject. We've tested different barrels, different barrel lengths, different chokes, more ports, less ports, light brass ammo, high brass ammo, all kinds of stuff. It makes no difference whatsoever. But the big question is why, and what difference do the ports make in other areas, if any? So for illustration purposes, what's happening here? So your load is coming up the barrel, reaches the choke tube, exits the gun, and then what happens is you have a bunch of gas that escapes through these ports. Now, you would think that that gas would reduce recoil. However, let me demonstrate something. I'm going to spin the barrel for you. Oh, look at that. Ooh, ah. And what you can see is that there are omnidirectional ports, which means the ports are in every direction. So this way, that way, towards you, towards me, every direction ports are facing, so that gas is escaping in every direction. So if your barrel was flat like this, the shot leaves the barrel, gas escapes in every direction, it has a net zero effect on the direction that the muzzle moves. Okay, it does nothing for that. But then people think, well, you're still losing gas and you're venting gas, so that should reduce recoil. Here's the thing about that, guys. By the time your load comes up and the shot itself clears the ports, remember there's a shot cup that the shot is in, and sometimes that extends backwards a fair bit. The shot is outside of the barrel by the time that gas begins to vent out of the ports. So you have very little pressure behind this load. So the shot leaves, all the energy has been expended, very little energy and gas in terms of volume and mass is escaping through these ports in any direction. So it has no bearing whatsoever on muzzle rise, and it has no bearing whatsoever on actual recoil energy. The damage is done by the time gas begins to escape through the ports. Now, that does do one thing. The ports have one small effect, one small impact, and that is that they do vent some gas in every direction, but they vent more noise than they vent gas. So what you have now is sound traveling in every direction that you've got the ports, more so than just out the end of the barrel. So it actually makes things a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit louder for the shooter and those who may be on the same firing plane as the shooter, which is actually more of a negative than the positive. Now, choke tube companies in general, by and large, have been saying for years that porting does nothing. And that includes choke tube companies that make ported chokes. And I've asked some of them, and they said, yeah, we do make ported chokes because people want them. They think that they do something. They want to buy them, so we make them for those people. But let's talk about barrels. There's a little bit more to say about choke tubes, but let's talk about the barrel next. You can see the porting right here on this barrel. There's 2 rows on that side, 2 rows on this side, and as I spin it around, you will notice that the ports in the barrel are only on the top of the barrel. So they vent gas in one direction, that is up. So what happens here then as the gas begins to vent up, it pushes the barrel down. Now, of course, the recoil energy and the muzzle rise are pushing the barrel up. Gas is venting, pushing the barrel back down, which helps to mitigate muzzle rise on a ported barrel. Does it do a significant job of that? It does indeed. It does a fairly good job of that. It's not overwhelming, but it's absolutely noticeable. Now, that should be of no surprise to us because we have single directionality with all of the ports on the barrel. But does it affect recoil, not just muzzle rise? Well, the short answer to that is yes. Yes, it does affect recoil, and it affects it noticeably. So why would that affect recoil having ports here instead of having ports here? Well, it's just this few inches of difference mainly. On some, the ports are actually angled backwards so that they're pushing the gas up more like an angle like this, which creates some forward energy on the barrel, which counteracts some of the rearward facing recoil. But the ports on this choke tube, which I doubt you can see, are straight on. They are not at an angle whatsoever. And so there's no backward energy, which is kind of dangerous. If the angle is too high, it could spray you in the face. So even when you do have a backward angle, it's not by much, but there's no backward taper on these ports at all, yet it still helps reduce recoil. Why does that happen? Okay, so you've got the shot coming up through the barrel. It hits the ports, passes the ports, begins to vent gas and energy out of the ports. Now, yeah, it's venting it upwards, which helps control your muzzle rise, but you have a lot more pressure at this point. Because once you pass the ports, you still have this much barrel left, while the wad and the shot column are still inside of the barrel, creating back pressure. So that vents a lot more gas under a lot higher pressure out of those ports. That reduces gas and pressure that would have then escaped through the muzzle, generating recoil. But there's an even bigger piece of it. You're venting enough pressure by these particular ports right here to actually slightly reduce the velocity of the load itself. Now, we're not talking about a drastic velocity drop. We're probably somewhere around, 10 to 30 feet per second, though depending on the barrel and the ports and where the ports are, could be more than that. So you are venting some of that energy. You're also dropping that velocity some by venting some of that pressure. And all of this works together to reduce the felt recoil to the shooter. Now, if the ports were right at the end of the barrel where the choke tube is, probably wouldn't make a whole lot of difference either way. But because of where they are, the side of the barrel that they're on, they're both reducing muzzle rise and felt recoil. How much are they reducing that felt recoil though? Well, finding accurate information on this is extremely difficult because no two barrels tend to be ported the same way. In order to test this, you would have to basically get a barrel without ports in it, shoot that barrel, get some data, then drill ports into that barrel, shoot it again under the exact same atmospheric conditions with the same ammo, and then check that data again. And oh yeah, you would have to have instrumentation sensitive enough to detect minor changes. My instrumentation is not that sensitive, nor do I have barrels that I can just drill holes into. There are some guns, very few, but some that make ported and non-ported versions. But even then, testing it with good instrumentation is very expensive. But from what I can tell you, from the feeling into the shoulder and the minor data that I have, somewhere between 10 and 20% reduction of felt recoil into the shoulder. That is not overwhelming, but it is noticeable. You can feel the difference in that load. Now, another thing that people accuse both ported choke tubes and ported barrels of being able to do is reducing the pressure behind the load, thus stabilizing the shot, resulting in more uniform patterns. And or some version of that ports creates a pressure variation in between the shot column and the wad, which then enables better wad separation and thereby better patterns, especially with certain fancy marketed wads. Now, what I've seen in the data, guys, is absolutely no difference whatsoever between ported and unported barrels and choke tubes when it comes to pattern density or any measurable outcome that you could see from wad separation. operation. And I have done quite a bit of testing on the subject. In fact, if anything, I've found non-ported barrels to perform slightly better in terms of patterning. And with choke tubes, you know, you could go to the store and buy 3 choke tubes, same company, same brand, same constriction, same day, screw all 3 of them into the end of your barrel and get slight variations on patterning. If they're junk, it could be big variations on patterning. Just the variation from choke to choke and gun to gun is as much or more than the variation that you usually see between ported or non-ported. Now, if you really want to reduce felt recoil, I've got 2 things that you could do, both of which are drastically more effective than porting anything. One's very expensive, one's very inexpensive. The more expensive one is this: buy a higher-end shotgun. Guns like the Barretta A400 Extreme Plus and the Benelli Super Black Eagle 3 both have recoil reduction systems built in that'll do more than ports. And hey, neither of those guns has a ported barrel. They could have ported them if they wanted to, but their recoil systems make a bigger impact with fewer downsides. The other thing you can do, which is very cost-effective, is shoot smaller loads. Drop down from 3.5 to 3-inch loads, or drop down from 3 to 2 3/4-inch loads. Most people have a higher kill rate with lighter loads than they do heavier loads, because chiefly recoil, but also lighter loads tend to have more pattern efficiency. And so if you're able to shoot better with less recoil and put more of the pellets in the shell on the target, you're going to take more birds. Now, you could also take some of the money that you save from using those smaller loads, invest that in sporting clays practice, which will do more than anything else on the planet to help you take more birds. Now, another question people have is about autoloaders. Do they reduce felt recoil? If so, by how much and why, as well as how bad really are 3.5-inch shells? Should you ever hunt with them? Well, my answer is no, but I've addressed both of those 2 subjects in depth in specific videos that you can find right here. Thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you, and go get them in the woods.